Curators of Souls. Jos Cruz. Synopsis. The knowledge described throughout this work were acquired during the various incarnations that the author and writer lived and witnessed, and developed over all previous experience, physical as well as the latter. The proof of this is that it was written by the Spirit, as well as all of the above have been already published as assessed by experts in the field of ancient science concerning the world of spirituality, with the purpose of bringing aid to the people, to be taken to wake up by themselves, and thus evolve spiritually. As such, these works were dedicated at a time of changes in the spiritual universe, in which the author presented the facts and knowledge originated in previous reincarnations, referring to the physical body, mind, spirit and soul. Him can access and make use of such knowledge prior to his last physical birth, and can describe them and apply them even in life force. Only that this work has a special feature unlike any other previously written. In this the author goes further. Abandon all your past experiences and lessons as reincarnations earlier, and passes through the doors of the future, and enters the great void everlasting to include the whole. And it is from this plan and includes everything merges, who is Son of Light, that his writing of the infinite spirit of the times, for your gift as a way to illuminate the paths to your future. Grateful. Chapter 1: The Hyperactive Indigo Children. It is the year 1962, and finished the age of Leo, which remained for a period of 2 millennia. For approximately the last 100 years was that many babies were born or dubbed indigo children's future. These fantastic children began to rise as we know in large quantities due to the need that existed at the time of evolution as a species. As such, the mission that brought initially was to help in the reform of all existing systems in social and educational humanity. Except that it did not happen fast enough to match, due to entrenched societies and religions, as well as the non-acceptance by parents and educators of these spectacular indigo children, as gifted children, which fell by about 85% of births worldwide this time around the year 1955. After their birth, these light beings had many times the size of the head, a little higher in the rest of the body. This was due to a greater amount of mass head, thus having a greater capacity for reason of all that beheld the brain. One other notable peculiarity that distinguishes them from other children they considered normal, was the fact that they have big eyes and fix other people's eyes. 6. This setting was because the indigos have a very strong perception of light, and could have the privilege to read the auras of other people, with extreme ease. Also saw angels and other beings of light, had premonitions and predicted events, accompanied by great intuitive power. They were also holders of a powerful brain structure very different as regards the use of the potential of hemispheric. The left less developed, representing the right side of the physical body. And the right to clear-cut more developed than the spiritual. This had the ability to go beyond the intellectual. Most of these parents, as they witnessed these events as well as more relevant, and do not feel qualified to deal with these children as normal. These parents often sought in the medical findings that would lead to discern who actually their children were and what they were born. But to live with the medical science, and was not yet well developed, consolidated at the beginning, it was not of facts belonging to a higher spiritual nature. They began to put them on the fringe of society and to regard them as being hyperactive. So during the term of this century, these indigo children, who have always been rising over the scale but rarely, then had to start fighting against this type of human discrimination. Many of those who had the patience and courage to be able to reach adulthood without being played in its evolution, able to develop certain specific skills, through their human cells, causing them to change certain provisions to remain in the society, as part of their faces and ways of being. As human beings that were overdeveloped achieved these remarkable achievements, for that time. And families began to accept them, respect them and take pride in having someone with these special gifts in the family. Society in general found that was not so well with these indigos, and admitted them as potential sources of structural development. the changes they had to do originally. Curators of Souls. They were then initiating the necessary changes, abolishing old habits, beliefs, changing the guidelines that existed on Earth previously imposed by beings more avant-garde, implementing new ways of living for future evolution of the entire human race, thereby bringing a new peace on Earth. But the mission that led to the Earth at that time was not yet complete. In his quest for survival down these indigo beings to adapt to the society going later start to change them. Had to serve more than part of the intellect, taking most of them have dropped a veil over the spiritual evolution, which was also part of their missions in general. Thus giving rise to many disagreements between families, social classes, religions and countries, drawing many of them to war. They felt they needed support for this part was as delicate as spirituality. They joined then all those who needed to evolve spiritually, whether indigo or not, by asking the cosmos of light to send reinforcements, as they had much of an unimpeded path to a new human spiritual awakening. 8. Curators of Souls. Chapter 2: The Crystal Children with Autism. The age of Leo and the beginning of new era ruled by Aquarius, which is justified for a further period of time, 2,000 years. It had its beginning on February 4, 1962. By this time, as a result of a rare alignment of the Sun with the Milky Way, a new color born and stayed for the next 2 millennia, as a motivator of spiritual change. The hitherto existing colors that persisted through this time, such as red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and indigo blue, then came to them to join the new color, the crystal universe. Assuming that these colors formed the human auras, after the births of babies since that time, a vast majority of them came to be born with the color crystal. They then came largely replace the birth of indigo as well as other beings with other colors of auras. They had all the capabilities of the earlier pioneers and explorers indigos, and more. When they began to incarnate as human, his mission represented the next stage of human spiritual evolution. Were classified as spiritual warriors, and soon began teaching small sins the virtues of dimensional. And because their energies are anchored in the 6th dimension, had the ability to open the 9th dimension that gave the name of Christ consciousness. That way they could enter the peace, love and harmony among the other beings in other auric colors. 10. They testified how to live lives empowered, as well as recognition of all his powers were confined to the human race. Thus came also assists in connection with the divine energies, due to the high spiritual power they had. A very private individual who also had to communicate was through the eyes. They looked deeply into the eyes of others to feel the auras of them, was their way of identifying other beings, and aged to introduce this form of communication over time, giving up the spoken language and gestures, passing just to communicate telepathically. These crystal children have also suffered at the beginning of its incarnations, because most of them come from their first reincarnation, hence a new world completely unknown to them, because they were previously only cosmic light. To overcome these shortcomings of previous experiences, helped themselves to the mothers and sometimes their parents, who signed contracts before they were born as a shelter, the society only and only until the age of 7 years. These parents and other caregivers were the first to feel that something strange was happening in the relationship between them and these crystal children, something that has not happened to other children born earlier. This fact was due to these children right from babies, they can access the registry of the aura, and therefore could feel the anger, tension, their parents entailed in their subconscious, starting at how to begin to change the behaviors of these parents. Among several behaviors that these children had crystal, one of them was their personal energy powers, worthy of great spiritual masters. Curators of Souls. Other multidimensional skills that come with them were having the ability to read people's energy fields, so how to move large objects and weights through the mind, could read books without opening them, as well as the levitation of bodies, due to the extraordinary capabilities crystalline unusual that these children had, only parents and guardians or other more developed spiritual beings. Interacting with them, the feeling is that they could identify who they were, and that brought the mission to accomplish on earth. The latter give them the name of peacemakers, among others sacred in vogue by humans. The others who had not been touched by these children's spiritual light crystal, they began to put aside in society, as they did with the indigo, considering the crazy or autistic. Only to the extent that the more children were born in crystal increasing amounts, these beings of light, more antiquated, were affected by the new crystal light. And many are forced to change their concepts to these children regardless of their age's crystalline, moving to a new consciousness born within them, leading to rushing into a new spiritual awakening. 12. Curators of Souls. Chapter 3. The Crystal Children Indigo. At that time during the transition, most babies born planetary crystal, their auras were the color of pure crystal. After starting to develop to an older adult, many of them to be misunderstood by the society that region. They chose to hide their original cravings, and that if they intended to do. Many have chosen low opposed by living in an intellectual way, many times a decision of the society. These beings, because they have a system very advanced biorhythm, not giving vent spiritual energies, which retained in themselves, were forced many times to gain certain habits of dependencies, as consumption of drugs, hard drugs, or alcoholism among others, which in time led to atrophy were increasingly in primary essence. Many of them are dying with advanced age, but these aspects have, often unconsciously, to enforce some of their visits to Earth, other crystal indigo, who when the spark of light spiritual touched them, and was streaked color indigo, these could easily situate some of its energy on Earth. Why could apply energy indigo or crystal as a form of self-defense? Later, when the ages have changed, most of them are updated by changing the color indigo, which had for the entire crystal. 14. There were also spiritual beings of light crystal, these even rarer to find. They have always been rising over the millennia, though more narrowly. These pioneers were the first crystal, known as Buddha, Christ and other masters of light realized or enlightened, who had already made all the wheel rises up pre-incarnation's spiritual totals, and decided to do one last reincarnation, them to be one of the hallmarks of spiritual light, or the future of other beings as they follow their footsteps crystal sacred. Many of them were never identified, who were discovered in general were killed or burned alive, regarded those as witches, or mad because they rebelled against the ways that societies had for their peers, not accepting them. Because of these barbaric events, crystal beings, as they began to feel that their frank complacency, humility and love, was not well accepted by more other beings more economically affluent, who held high positions in the social world, and served this power to kill whoever he was, to bring new hopes of progress poorer classes. Thus passed during a good part of life to live hooded, patiently applying their skills to others without making themselves known and get noticed, because one of the largest capacities that the beings of light crystal had was to heal the illnesses of other beings, whether animals or humans, due to its facilities to penetrate the souls of these beings and leading them to heal from there. And therefore, after that they felt their souls strengthened by spiritual energy. Curators of Souls. Chapter 4. Crystal Adults. Only the end of the 20th century, these beings crystalline either as adults or older, who had begun to feel out of the shadows, and apply all his gifts as a function of others, helping and healing the most without feeling fear for anything or anyone. As well as teaching in schools and other educational establishments, new waves of crystal children began to be born from that time. Such changes were bound to happen because as people of color also crystal, the universe began to feel a greater quantity of crystalline light, causing them to wake up even more than they already were, going to have a greater power of nature spiritual energy. Because of this change, the new light crystal planet began to relocate the beings that were basically carbon for crystalline beings. These new DNA sequences only exist in higher dimensional levels. This change has been great traction. Bodies now have only 2 DNA sequences to 1024 sequences. This does not affect only humans but also all vertebrates and invertebrates. Like everything else, he lived and remained at the top of the earth. Like plants, fish, trees and even the water becomes pure crystal. 16. Human beings as a whole had to get rid of their old prejudices that kept them tied to the third dimension, both mentally and physically, starting a new path to tread spiritual higher. As all these changes were needed in human evolution were extremely fast. But most people did not feel ready. How not live spiritually, served only the physical body and mind as well as everything that was created by her. These ancient humans, naturally those who have accepted these new changes in his being, passed easily and quickly this new set of changes, which it gave the new DNA sequence. Only the remaining, who was the majority of the world, began to suffer increasingly from new diseases and diseases previously unknown to the medical and scientific at the time, although it evolved a little mental and physical fields, spiritual but not in the field, with the sole exception of small groups that are especially dedicated to these types of cures, the compounds which were in general by indigo crystal and crystal pure. Crystalline, these beings were then begun to be sought by people to be treated and cured, as it had for many centuries earlier, before being discovered and applied to modern medicine. These beings of crystal light, for their remarkable ability to penetrate the souls of these patients, and heal through the light, they began to be called the Trustees of Souls. These names appeared because many humans have never despised. Its geological roots came from ancient tribes, who continue to perpetuate from generation to generation the teachings and practices of their ancestors. With regard to treatments or healers, also called trustees, they began to admit this crystalline and venerate them as they did to their ancestors. It was everything that crystal beings older patiently waited for centuries to serve those in need, in a clear, without themselves being cursed or go feed the fires. Curators of Souls. Chapter 5 Symptoms of the New Light Crystal. These Trustees of Souls, older and experienced, which were also sometimes known as Cause of Light workers, was through the spiritual light that those patients treated early, as they have evolved by themselves or with the help of the most developed. They failed to apply this energy of love which also called to treat, and it began to borrowers and drove it directly to the souls of these beings, leaving behind the old and traditional treatment processes, which helped the sick just mentally and physically to pass them through to heal the soul. Why were these souls, who were the roots of all the possible diseases that affected most of the human race? During this adaptation result, most people felt quite confused. They were accustomed to having certain physical and mental symptoms, and others were beginning to feel completely different and unidentifiable, both for them and for the medical classes, but not for the Trustees of Souls. These masters of crystalline energy then began to spread out their tasks and what they proposed, and worked at will. Liam souls as they did previously with the indigo auras, only just so perceptive. 18. When the reading and the diagnosis was made ready, then elucidated the patients who had problems and how to solve them, leading them to an opening conscience. The symptoms that these beings had in most cases were temporary, depending on the capabilities of each individual in the form of unconditional acceptance of these new changes. The most common symptoms to physical levels, occasional diarrhea, were experienced as a result of new energy inputs in the body, leading to debug the same. After that they felt more integrated than before. Very strong headaches, because due to the penetration of these new energies to bring the balance of the two-hemispheric brain. What became more balanced after such mentally and spiritually? Other flu-like symptoms with the sweats and high temperatures, sneezing in the series, were guidelines that bodies were clear of negative factors, physical and emotional, contained for years or lifetimes. After just felt more liberated in their hearts. All this could be accompanied by sharp pains in the bones and joints, was the strong energy input in the skeletons, forcing them to take the old bone positions, as when they were children. There were people already with considerable age that grew several inches in height, others began to walk more upright than before. The vertigo also made its appearance. They were caused by the realignment of chakra with the cosmos, turning then to feel more in union with the All. Many of these people could hear all kinds of sounds, while stripped of its bark. That could range from cascades of water flowing inside their heads, music, people talking, and the sounds of cosmic spheres. These sounds were physical attunements with the sounds of the universe. Curators of souls. After failing to hear these sounds, auditions were more sensitive and accurate, easily capturing many airwaves. Many of these new symptoms, as well as tremors, could be felt in the physical body, especially when they were relaxed. It was a new energy to stretch and elongate more muscular parts. Once you have gained a better grasp and loftiness muscle. Also at the heart palpitations were felt. These symptoms were due to the adaptation of the heart muscle, as well as the arteries, the new subtle energy that was mixed in increasing blood circulation, going after that, to feel more energetic, these changes in the circulatory system, often leading to loss of muscle strength mainly in the hands, feet, legs, arms and large nests, particularly those members of the same ends. This circulation process was to make the blood come under heavy pressure, all extensions blood, in order to disengage the completely normal for their circulations. During this energy and after cleaning, the people felt physically lighter. With regard to breathing, often had difficulty breathing and occasionally heavier or lighter when they were relaxed. Nothing else going on that adaptation to the new lungs pranic energy that hovered in the air. Later felt an enormous sense of well-being, from the breath that could completely control your whole being. It happened many occasions felt tired or exhausted by any spend minimal physical exertion. Physical reactions were due to old habits that were physical. The physical body and which were sealed against the new energy being released. This new energy power, since it was introduced in physical bodies, they did their hair and nails grow faster than usual. Due to the composition pranic be more enriched. 20. Curators of Souls. Chapter 6 New Concepts Mental. In those bygone days crystal rays, which happened on Earth, not only affect humans physically, causing them to change their behavior, both personally and for his fellow men and animals, as the whole nature in general, going to respect them and helping all species to evolve the conscience. First they learned and then taught other beings latest developments in the ground. Some symptoms to humans due to exposure to UV crystal also altered their mental bodies. These changes were felt in many ways. Just as stress, tension, high levels of anxiety. This was because the new energy to penetrate the brain brought about a greater strain on it, leading at times to depersonalize beings, making them feel unable to go to whatever. They felt that something was turning in their minds but do not know what it was exactly. This new energy removed old thought patterns, leaving the mind cascades a new consciousness in every being. 22. Many of these people resorted en masse to hospitals and specialists in all areas of health belongs, but could do nothing for them to be not only prescribed drugs or therapies, but nothing did change the intention of this new light-colored holy crystal, when looking for the needy beings, trustees of holy souls, and others who immediately went to elect them in the most convenient ways to solve each case, leading them to consciously become aware of the changes that were going on. Then immediately began to treat themselves and to heal themselves, that in most cases were just passing situations and less mention, sometimes just a few weeks, others months or years leading to achieve. The souls of trustees felt that when one was getting to be able to start to change mental spirit, advised to accept lovingly all that feels, only with the heart completely open to these new energies. To indicate a good physical maintenance, consume only vegetables, fresh fruit, water, clay minerals for muscle spasms, baths, and the maximum stay in contact with moderately and sunbathing. And get plenty of rest, without forgetting to meditate a lot, because nothing was felt in humans, if they were not able to receive these new cosmic energies. If they came in large quantity and intensity was because they had the capacity to support such. Because the more you deny assuming that part of the universe, and suffered most were late before the other, those who insisted on not to accept these proposals knowledgeable of the entire evolutionary process of the planet. They had to wait for several reincarnations future to evolve over the millennia up. These beings that refused to accept the new evolutionary consciousness were those who lived permanently in the mind, as everything she built. Curators of Souls. Chapter 7 Opening Spiritual. This new leap in humanity has made people become more conscious about what the ruling and held the top of the earth. That was nothing they were accustomed to think, but what began to feel, the sacred and spirituality that were part of them as well as the entire universe. Being to abolish old patterns of thought, beginning to relate more to their innermost, as they were discovering their potential values, then began to discern what was more appropriate to accept them because of their developments, thereby accepting unconditionally mental changes in the spiritual. At the beginning of this process was a little difficult but could be inter-helping each other. The change has at the very start in the physical body, to the extent that they would accept, their minds began to accuse also the signs of new cosmic energies. Symptoms such as changes in that new DNA both in body and mind, human cells were also affected, which in turn began to change skills and mental qualities to a higher level of human consciousness. During this change of mind, as I previously had one of those human beings in the physical, also had their ailments to accept these new faculties energy that they discovered many of them on their own. 24. As they began to control the mind through meditation or other practices were changing habits that have previously led there, as well as its similar animals and even in general. These mental adjustments were very salient and very strange, for those who refused to accept spirituality as beginning and end of all that existed in the past, present and future, and then sought the trustees of souls, due to thrombosis affecting the physical states and minds. What normally almost always paralyzed his right side and left side of the brain. This was because these beings refused to accept what they proposed the deity, who came out as a simple light beings they were. These negative people who insisted on not to accept these realities, that the cosmos imposed on them, were rarely recovered this experience, would have to wait for new/s reincarnations in order to overcome this non-acceptance, by love. Other mental confusion to occur was not able to concentrate on anything that was once part of a routine life. This is because the mind was programmed to be able to withstand changes to higher reasoning. Some people felt like they were about to madness, but that never happened. These symptoms were due to begin to relate to your energy body, and at the same time with the new energy that came from him, becoming more sensitive. The beings of males felt very frustrated, because they are no longer as active as before, because they begin to feel more intuitive, feeling part of the emerging feminine energy in them, starting to feel more calm and considerate. The women also underwent hormonal changes due to the endocrine system. And they were often taken to cry without knowing why. No longer was the act of crying releases hormones, feeling more emotionally balanced. Even the menopause began to appear in very young children, and disappeared much earlier than previously. The result was due to the acceleration of the whole chain universe metamorphosis. Curators of Souls. Because such changes were to take place only over thousands of years, but need the universe to evolve faster. And by the way, the Earth had been mistreated by humans during the Zix, XX and Xi, the same that to defend against such attacks, had to make these changes in a short time. That took about a century. Other situations were related to children ever later began to vocabulary. Also this happened because of these little creatures still apply the same communicative way as happened at the beginning of human existence. That is communicated through telepathy, which was the mother tongue of them all. Just as adults mostly forgotten that natural language. The children were waiting for their response communications through this form, which is why later began talking to others several decades before. The indigo children and crystal were the major force behind the renewal and application of this method being communicative human beings and animals over the years that followed. 26. Curators of Souls. Chapter 8, Changing Old Habits. To the extent that the mind was metamorphosing through the new cosmic light, for the new concept of evolution, many forms of living and being were shifting all the time. One very salient out the changing patterns of sleep. Who previously fell asleep easily at bedtime, insomnia began to feel great through the sleepless nights, after falling asleep or wake up repeatedly during sleep for short periods of time, going back to sleep immediately. Such was due to readjustments of the new energies that were focused on the pituitary gland, located at the top of the head during sleep, was altered to expand the brain through magnetic waves or vibration, bringing the unconscious to begin identifying the divine that existed crystalline these energies. In general, these changes have led to a reduction of approximately 50% of the hours of sleep, which were previously spent to relax the physical body and the mind, as they began to feel the effects of these changes, had become more aware of themselves and fresher mind after waking up. Only a new situation is encountered when staying asleep, the body physically tired when the same physical effort expended. Then they began to adopt these as filling a time of meditation practice dominated passive. 28. This practice was in fact still remain, either lying or other body positions in order to feel relaxed and awake during those hours. Felt that after such a revitalized again, had knowingly accepted the divine energy that previously only accepted it when asleep. Due to feel more aware of what was happening in their various bodies, physical, enteric, mental and spiritual. Passed during these meditations who realize most of them in the attend through a variety of different new physical sensations and mental to these new energies to circulate around the physical body. Many times they are very strong and thick that these subtle energies were being implemented, did away with the old energy feeding the body, so far often quite painful. The release of these old energies, made itself felt as physical sensations of burning bodies, which range after some time left to feel such discomfort, in some cases even falling in some places the skin was felt that more heat. Sometimes focused more on certain parts of the body, where they remained coyotes or energy centers, making you feel burning, itching or type of needles often bites the thousands throughout the body. It was under these feelings that the new energy pushing out of the physical body, which still persisted harmful energy, conveying the most diverse branches blood and energy, these new energies where often no longer exist or never existed a movement of energy quality. Like having the sensations of the body freezes completely, or just the joints, feel chills the body to go from top to bottom. That was no longer the divine energy to be poured over them in the form of crystal light. Curators of Souls. The trustees of souls who had passed along the same reincarnations' previous situations, it was they who continued to elucidate the ways to overcome these painful changes smoothly. Because to explain and not being themselves at certain times to change, many symptoms that persisted over these human beings, forced them to self-change to themselves, due to become more aware of the light that touched them. This was one of the ways to give them time to reflect, feel and develop these new colleges recently acquired. As they were going these phases, their minds accompanied these new sensations of pain, which in turn led them to begin to do without. They are in a constant state of demand on these christened beings. Because only the plight of these energy exchange, humans have seen and felt what was to be and be no mind. Their minds do not stop ever, people is that they failed to give much importance to what happened in the mind as before. When made aware about this began to feel and recognize the spirituality that was born with them. 30. Curators of Souls. Chapter 9, Changing Directions. Due to changes in human bodies by this crystal light color, every way they used to be changed when they saw us. going to be more sensitive and development, but also resulted in some inconvenience and experience of these beings of light in human form. 1. Senses with taste. For a time, it sometimes takes a year or more, slowly began to lose the flavors of that consumed in food. People were taken without knowing why, to change certain habits of the food chain, apart from food which had hitherto enjoyed, replacing these foods with more healthy and to whom they began to meet in a different way, discovering the real essences of natural foods apart from all other, less acceptable by the body. Passing this way to have more refined taste, felt when foods were altered in their natural origins. Another change had to do with the smell. Now have a more accurate olfactory ability to smell it even before they were unidentifiable, and can no longer remain on polluted sites. The audio system also has its changes. 32. The hearing began to be more sensitive than before, so all that respected the low vibration sounds began to be felt, so that more severe or acute acoustic, albeit in low tones, created enormous discomfort in the ears of people in general, as the sounds were started in the vibrations, which later reached these beings started to identify situations that were previously for them. Because of this, many different vibrations felt like the wind, rain, cold, including sunlight, as well as all that was material that was possible to move. These vibrations felt consciously. Another way that became very well was the vision. The ability to envision who owned anything that was outside through the eyes, has become an active inward reflection, which developed after consecutively began to discover the third vision chakra housed in the center of the forehead. In the beginning, while it fit the new vision, felt with the views look cloudy or hazy, or in a dark, have the perception they passed or were mostly at night, more especially in nature, could dazzle the light emanating from their physical bodies or their auras, mainly in crystals. Many other times were not noticeable, was nothing more than normal vision to adapt to the new energy, and cosmic light physical bodies to pierce through all energy centers. Always starting from short periods to give rise to potential third vision, embedded in chakra front, giving him the opening needed to start the unveiling of the divine light. With this new capability, people could easily bring up their own aura, interior or to the outside of others, as well as the views of animals and things, and also begin to check other beings of light who presented themselves as small signal forms and oval bubbles and others. As the umbilical cords that silver linked their souls. Curators of souls. Depending on each human being, light, many of these meetings could take place either during the day or at night. Remaining in meditation or not, only happened when it was least expected. At times not mind. The sense of touch has also changed dramatically. Because the extent that they felt increasingly more sensitive and prone to accept such changes, then began to feel enormous differences with regard to the fact that touch and be touched. For any ring that is too small for it is always a vibration, which when it reaches large turns into sound. They began to have great sensitivity when playing in the other, these vibrations felt in more subtle ways than before. Thus were to have felt a greater awareness, both when they were touched by other people, or going to feel more deeply the climate change. It is going to interact more with the designs that the designated nature of the universe to Earth. In this way they also, as beings of light, not only identify these changes as they were touched by them. This was a way of acknowledging the knowledge imparted to them by the cosmos. Developing skills on the sensations of cold or heat, through the withdrawal of mind that led them to ignore such elements were negative or positive. Leaving simply the feeling of when need be. The sixth sense with all these new appetites and new general powers on the various forms and gifts, one would come to cherish the gifts for older, since they persisted with any birth. Which people did not care much or little used it. The power of intuition due to changes in your mental field, at one point began to discern to what was the word of the mind, and his likeness, but although quite different, the signals that came from the spirit. 34. When they found in themselves a stabilizing platform that led them to imply and feel when they should be aware of the mind that they proposed. reached at the beginning and developed a very cost-certain capabilities that persisted due to situations and things that had dependencies on his fellows. But after they had passed these phases could ignore what was happening in the mind. When you need to consult the power in the universe, did by intuition to benefit all beings including nature. Curators of Souls. Chapter 10 Spiritual Symptoms. Given the general circumstances were evolving more and more as noble beings cosmic light, they began to see that there was something desperately and they felt they needed but were not able to reach through everything they had learned rationally over all reincarnations who had already made. The spirituality when in their worldly lives without knowing why, felt their physical bodies as if they were floating on air. This is because the mental body began to show signs of weakness on the astral body. And freed from the bonds which held that added to the physical body, so the mental body to feel freer of thoughts, emotions and illusions, to be led to feel physically large. That with time and practice that it could even lead came from the physical body to levitate. Another sign was that they felt as spiritual being in some place very quietly, and suddenly feel an overwhelming sense of displacement of the physical body to another higher dimension. It also happened to capture the cosmic light, feel like part of it and to enter the same past to identify them by the divine for themselves. It was a new feeling of the whole union, the universe. 36. Another of the most varied symptoms linked to the fact that at times start to feel strange, as well as their physical bodies in vibration. In this way the mind was completely wiped of all thought. The body and mind to receive the divine energies, such that after these people were confused, but feeling more connected to the subnatural. The extent that they would increasingly penetrated its changes, entire societies have been taken to change their professions or to exchange it for other previous purchase upgrades to them. Such events due to the fact of being more empathetic with their spirituality, and began to see that many of these people were not suited to certain functions that represented and played. Thus if rediscovering, increasingly left to live according to the mind and the demands made by it. Each one began to feel as special to be unique but part of the universe. That in view of this was taken by them to make decisions themselves and to discern which occupations where they could feel more active and will to live while their spiritualities. Because of these developments gained decision-making capabilities in everything in life, leaving behind old concepts rational that held the most archaic forms of life. Another reality is that because they felt great increase in their self-realizations, began to feel happier with them. Making clear that harmony and happiness to the notorious dragging outside of themselves and others more sedate them, developed the ability to overflow the love that came from spirituality in all that applied to the body and soul, whatever the extent that they became more aware, began to feel so notorious that even many species of animals and other beings not human already living in less developed states of spirituality, but taught new ways of being and to be human, which rose more in terms of spirituality. Curators of Souls. Chapter 11 The New Animal Behavior. Other animals considered irrational, especially the more developed called home at the time, also strode to developments in the group is also aware of this new openness to the spiritual part of humans, and draw near to them to help them also to evolve with them. Because when the beginning of humanity was all beings are equal, all came from the same source of light to evolve as beings on earth. Those who had achieved a greater lightness over those who had lower lighted. The latter in turn helped others in their ancestry, their development and adaptation to the ground plane. But as they began to feel superior to others who helped them, increasingly served them for all that was necessary, even to have tools for food. And so going to call them dumb animals, because only trained for certain tasks, not letting them evolve in the mental part, only in physics. But the essence has always remained within these beings they called animal, like a seed waiting to be watered. Their conscience is to emerge, for later spiritually also blossom as humans. 38. Until the time, and unlike humans that evolved individually, these animals only may do so in groups defined by race, The part that was a very lengthy process, although they always communicate through telepathic waves in the world. These waves were not always well received and sent or due to vibrations contradictory to people who have humanity, as pollution in every aspect for example. But when the new crystal light began to be felt by these animals, which were also touched by these wonderful bundles of light past then begin to unfold the seed that remained over all times within themselves, leading to change their behavior, just as the great metamorphosis was felt in the growth in the rational part. These beings they called irrational just had to follow some footprints left by humans and not imitate them in misconduct that had developed over time. These beings were called many times animals that had to prove that it was the love, affection, feature, loyalty and friendship to humans. That these aspects were much less developed than them since the beginning of mankind. Those who felt not as animals but also as beings of light, they needed to absorb the same quality pranic, they are to survive. Dealing with them empathetically, providing them with the same evolutionary well-being and help as they did to his fellow men. It was from this that all beings who lived at the top of the earth, they were human or animal, began to alter the food chains of which they fed. Leaving ancient habits of predators and cannibalistic. Humans were the first to notice these changes in the physical bodies first. The shape of the cavity was changing for many reincarnations, leaving carnivore aspect of having to perform the vegetative form. Curators of Souls. Chapter 12 Tantric Practice. In consequence of the changes that humanity suffered as concerned human beings, they began to feel different about the new sexual symptoms. Most of those who regarded sexuality as just a physical act, which sought mental or physical pleasure and sometimes as a physiological need. They found that they were changing in this respect the new lines, feeling more passive men mainly due to a spiritual opening, which previously affected women more. He then moved to have smoother behavior in these relations, interacting and engaging your spirits with their peers, leading them to live a new sexuality more openly and discovering the pure spirituality that existed in those acts which often led to the reproduction of human species. By living this way consciously to these new symptoms, which are delivered completely in body and soul, began to dazzle and determine certain experiences, until then completely unknown to some of them. Discovered and developed several methods that led to the highest apotheosis, that their bodies could endure mental and physical, during these acts. That in turn is to relax and go out of mind, without regard to what they could feel through their minds, began to discover the missing link that existed between them and the universe. 40. Because it was a kind of relationship that existed between two bodies opito, and only this way is that one could achieve true spiritual projection during lovemaking. Due to the abolition of the mind, the field was free to seek out what was sacred. It took millennia to achieve perfection under total area for this part. That came about as follows. Leaving aside the thoughts were that they were only seeking a complete mental and physical relaxation between both partners. Leading the way to begin to feel vibrations in the astral physical bodies, that penetrated the threshold chakra located in the left shoulder, coming down one side of the body going to activate the energy in the basic chakra, the subtle way of making up the other side opposite the physical body. Leading the way this energy to go through all the other chakra or centers existing in the bodies, through the subtle channels in these pairs, so that when we finally reached the circulatory chakra crown, all that energy that united the existing chakra, that in turn opened up the field where stood the spirit, who feel the powerful energy that is manifested through light, taking these human beings in most times briefly in the beginning to have visions of past or future lives. As flashes of light often identified as stars or lights that were seen scattered through the third vision, more pure variety of colors or shapes as roads of light which depends on human beings due to the quality and quantity, or thickness energy emanating their bodies through the chakra, who later came in contact with the divine light, that all fueled. Curators of Souls. The more experienced beings often could remain for months or years without tiring physically or in any other way because they're in perfect harmony with the divine light. And some of them on this domain could ascend through to realization or spiritual enlightenment, leaving to humans in spiritual terms, becoming completely enlightened beings or holy light. 42. Curators of Souls. Chapter 13 Spiritual Growth. To the extent that these beings were unveiling new values in their most intimate perfected taking the spiritual path. What that dazzled briefly during sex's apotheosis, were but little signs of deep meditative states. Behind these small nameplates were developing more ways to access this new level sacred. One was a meditation, that when leaving the physical body and is able to project the astral plane through their spirits, penetrated into outer space so that a mnemonic system. Just feel their spirits to sail cosmic energies and flavor of the divine light that came from them. How was due at the time to make these trips had a lot of practice before meditation, various forms of coherent and disciplined. Many times even sacrificing their own lives, did everything and anything they can to achieve these desired astral planes. Persistence with all that later were able to discover a new form, a completely innovative and radical, which was demonstrated by the results of the Trustees of Souls. These same people also alerted to the illusions that the mind created them. They should differentiate the illusion of reality, and these were without a doubt chosen by the universe to make the distinctions in these areas. 44. Because many human beings after they begin to relate to the divine, or were thought to be much more capable than others, which in fact honored the sacred in all its fullness. With minimal knowledge and even tried many of them could, often on their own thoughts and illusions deceive others who are needy and suffering. We were looking for only a small glow of light that illuminate their spirits hungry. These consistencies were led to believe in other scams pretending to buy those who were not true. The sacrificing more than they already felt, robbing them until the little energy they had some for your beautiful pleasures. Of course later as it was making a final judgment about these beings strongly disturbed and atrophied the most powerful beings of light as was the case of the Trustees of Souls. Felt that when these evil beings, they applied very heavy penalties of justice through love energy, they hated that they removed the most unusual and negative cause of their spirits. After these cleaning spiritual often without them realizing it, in ways that were tumultuous in their hearts, they were often driven to despair, not knowing why and by whom they were to be changed. It was a joke to the trustees, but later were forced by them to feel completely in reality the power that emanated from the heavens. If converting many of them, most advocates of spiritual said than before proclaiming false sense of, what other being enforced on the most disadvantaged spiritually? Those who accepted the sacred beings began to apply the law of human nature to be redeemed with the other what they had done. As in their search of the secular spheres that were notorious in the form of light, even their souls aim most paradigmatic unraveling the mysteries that had not understood how sacred. Curators of Souls. Only he who began a little to be excited about these practices, always came if they conformed more to the power that the universe was to trigger in their spirits, the power of the holy light, it often depending on whether to be, due to his energy never be the same consistency in the yard universal. It happened that these small signs were awakened in them about the various forms and ways. Sometimes using tiny reflections of light signals, with time and the meditative practices were improving more, giving the possibility to leave the shadows of darkness their real beings. That increasingly expanding these points of light they are allowed to flower more cosmic light. That turned into so rayed, to the extent that their consciences would be opening and breaking, all that existed in the mind that concealed the possibility of coming to a ton of light beings, the beginning to surface within themselves, these subtleties of cosmic light. What with the continuity of remaining faithful to the Holy One, these little rays of celestial energy began to embrace more the conscience, thus breaking the clouds or sky completely absent of color within the human mind, allowing an increasing absorptive capacity of this new energy, with views that looked more clarity in their spirits. When these perceptions were forced by the power of cosmic light energy, in the meantime to reflect on what should be changed in your experiences. What a way to feel such past to admit quite innovative changes quickly and amicably and subsequently conscientious. 46. Curators of Souls. Chapter 14 Humanity. The conclusions that were inhaled due to consequences of innovative noble facts in favor of human development were retained in people who had a greater spiritual capacity. To serve as a springboard to develop new structures of connection, among other beings less benefit in terms of understanding of the divine. These beings are more capable of serving all the power that could absorb the entire cosmos, and so much to others as needy beings, even to nature herself. When they had the clairvoyant noted a lack of light on smooth for a necessary evolution, could expand all the energy necessary for the proper term to apply. So help yourself to all the powers that gave them the universe, to play at the globe. Applications made on the waters of rivers and oceans, making them the purest crystal, increasing the quality of life of beings that lived beyond all vegetative plants. That led to a greater continuity of evolution from such, and everything completely unpolluted, also intervened in the pollution, which had opened a huge hole in the ozone, letting in large amounts of ultraviolet rays, and thus becomes an asphyxiating atmosphere over all the inhabitants of the earth. These trustees of the more evolved souls could such power because of the energy made available to him, giving him freedom to take action with great leaders who ruled the earth, when they were touched by the holy light from such enlightened beings. 48. Past to change the policies employed in industries that pollute the air, being reformed by more, which is not liberated gases into the atmosphere. For these beings just enough to feel the need for something or someone, to immediately connect with the energy coming from the light source, which is joined to the existing in his body. For then more power to transmute into that later on how to externalize light or vibration. Other beings who were already fully enlightened spiritually, who has lived only in the simplicity of eternal beings of light, capabilities that had to go to higher dimensions and return to earth. They were the ones who were also regarded as scientists of the spirit, for many reincarnations over the route made sidereal, accumulating over reincarnations all knowledge that encompassed all the mysteries of spirituality, as experiences in other worlds more developed than earth. Although these were always very unusual to find among the people living in this planet, through which they passed were notoriously identified by those who walked the same path to spiritual ascension. Such performed had no need to connect with the whole to get lighter to be used where necessary, as those who were not yet sufficiently developed for this part. Them just simply being where they are and felt they should stay or contact with anyone, because only their presence altered environments and populations in ways considered. Through the power of divine light that they were already part at all, only revealing only what still bound them to earth, who was benefactors of their missions as well as their physical bodies. Nothing else existed but the rest was that cosmic light, who testified to leave the physical body through the energy centers, spread throughout the human body in union with the universe. Curators of Souls. Chapter 15 Energy Centers. Human bodies radiate enormous amounts of light which in turn was transformed into energy, interact with the universe was made in heaven union. These light energy that held the physical bodies were part of that cosmos, which in turn were expelled to the exterior through the energy centers, which were more or less neatly distributed throughout the human body. In addition to the small branches through which passed the divine energy that made up the physical bodies, there were 10 major energy centers and 4 smaller and smaller ones. The diameters of 4 smallest 2 of them were located in the lower part of the body, the feet. A center of the sole of each foot, which could radiate light darker tones, with the goal of both off all the excess energy that human bodies are often admitted in excess, due to various factors such as excessive energy or solar power more overloaded. Feet as the physical core of the being that connected to the land, served as conduits for discharging the positive so that the earth was the negative pole, thus rebalancing the energy that kept the operation of these bodies. The hands turned stood on the palms were also circular in shape as all other human beings that made these. 50. These two energy centers could transpire many different colors and shades that ruled the spectrum when they were in apparent harmony was the lighter colors, as the white. These centers had several purposes, which when turned to the cosmos, or with palms together, increased the power in these divine beings. When facing the ground or in contact with it also helped to unload surplus energy. The application that had much in common was to be at the level of therapy animals and their peers. Because of these centers spent most of the divine energy pranic form, becoming more subtle way. That in turn when directed to any being who was ill, called the energy of love freeing patients from the most atrocious sufferings. In nature could be transmitted to plants causing them to recover from the ills that affect them, as well as the animals suffering from various diseases. Other smaller centers also were considered vital to the joints between members, who served as forward as energy changes. Regarding the major energy centers, the first is called basic, stood in the central area, had a lot of red energy that kept this very strong pelvic area, described as sexual reproductive area. This energy center was what kept the whole physical and sexual energy of every human being. It was a kind of energy that was applied more than sexuality, how to wear or maintain physical fitness unanimous. The second center was located higher up in the area umbilical. This was described as the center of the free will circulated through which all the energy, which descended or ascended the physical body, and which had an orange color. It was from this center that humans had decision-making attitudes, which were later sent to the brain. Curators of Souls. The third center was located in the abdominal area and Asta represented the sun, as it had a yellow color. The general application that defined him was related to the temperature of the physical body, which when accepted sunlight immediately turned the heat spectrum. The fourth energy center remained at the heart just above the right of the organ heart, which preceded the green light. The energy that came from this center was regarded as a loving energy, since related to feelings that came from the heart. The fifth center was located in the area threshold left was through him that humans were given cosmic energies and served as a filter, and then send them to other centers. The colors they had were more related to spiritual colors, depending on whether it be due to their consistency's energy. It was the channel through which passed the energy from the universe into being. The sixth energy center presented itself in the throat area, more precisely in the larynx. It was through him that there was communication with other beings of light. The color blue represents the color of communication with the cosmos, due to the vibration that the center produced and identification with it. The seventh center was related to the third vision, was in the middle of the forehead. It was through him that humans were able to view outer space as well as other forms of life on other planets, through meditative practices. In the model of the Earth had several functions. One was related to the auric views of things, animals and their peers in order to discover problems and diseases caused by them in physical bodies, astral, mental and enteric. 52. He also had the distinction of sending and receiving telepathic waves through vibrations that were denoted this center. This same research center also had the ability to move large objects, reading other human minds and among others to change the weather. It was considered to be the eye of spiritual beings of light. Eighth energy center was located a little higher on the head, and it was known as the angel of the energy center. Its usefulness was to be a channel of communication that humans used more in a particular way to connect with the divine power. This energy center in the more developed beings of light, the color crystal. In other less fortunate beings of light, just had a more yellowish color or was a complete absence of light in this center, especially when they were unspiritual beings. The ninth and last great center remained over the region crown at the top of the head. It was regarded as the gateway to spirituality, and it was through him that humans were lifted to personal fulfillment in the cosmos. Confinement had to rule all other centers and irrigate their brain, thereby expanding the awareness and clairvoyance. Colors that radiated were golden, purple or white. the cosmic light seeping under the coronary center after it was distributed to all other energy centers, when they all remained completely clear of opposing energies. These were majestically visible auric colors that stand out above the physical body through these energy centers, which often remained in state of grace levitating. With the evolution of the human being, that part was getting the other small energy centers, have developed more, become larger. Like other previously unknown, began to surface more and more in the human body, making it pure and bright. Curators of Souls. Chapter 16 Spiritual Being. To the extent that they accepted the changes were requested by the universe, these beings were made aware of all these absolute changes. Through these changes began to feel and internalize in their hearts, that this only and only due to the great heart of the metamorphosis into being spiritual beings. Who were taken to unravel this new spiritual path, many of them had to change radically and refrain from physical experience in the fields and overloaded mind. To feel spiritualized was not something that would have to think, but to feel what they called the cosmos in accordance with their spirits of light. They had to abandon certain habits, deplorable developments which were pending in mind. One of which was the pride. Pride to be banned completely. These beings made them feel different with new terms in relation to society and themselves in general. Being different was relying on to things or people that were previously necessary. Thus gave up everything that was superfluous material, only with the necessary living their lives. Such modifications led them to feel more at one with themselves, leaving their fellows need to achieve what they alone have such capabilities to achieve this. 54. The first step was taken because the cease pride gave way to the birth of humility. Humility was the sense of unity to the universe of beings. Feel humble after that could be seen completely naked from the previous pride, and thus spend only feel as mere beings of light connected to the cosmos, the ability to transmit that feeling, that humility towards others, less evolved beings through humanitarian actions, among others of the same gender. What the extent that these actions were undertaken in behalf of all their spirits increasingly opened, giving rise to a higher inflow of divine energy, which came of love. This energy, which in turn was distributed the same way, everyone and everything that inhabited the earth, was so powerful that passed through hearts and reached distant continents. Turning then to act and feel in humans that until then had not been touched by the spiritual power, also to be taken to practice the same in states of equality. It was a harmonious time during which much has been developed and applied as it relates to spirituality. To feel as spiritual beings, hence take the income needed for their developments to enlightened beings altogether, requiring certain specific personal requirements, some of which were related to food. They had to learn to nurture themselves in balanced quantities of edible food and prana, never being able to eat more than necessary for their physical maintenance. Excluded because the divine light all that was unnecessary and surplus. And as it happened, beings were deprived of their individual evolution in time. Because the energy are always balanced at any time that is required to help one of these beings, they would be prepared to grant. Another change was related to the dependence of sleep. Curators of Souls. Such a habit was cancelled completely because of these beings when they began to feel spiritual. Some that were no dependencies simply no longer need to sleep due to remain in meditative states for long periods, often years, only for food with prana and maintaining the physical bodies. Through the ages past this only rarely fully enlightened beings. The others went in search of the sacred formula. They also reach for the divine state, which was the full realization and passage of the human being of light, eternal spiritual self, other lazy or too late to get all self-luminous. Because the Illuminati has the height or phases of such elucidated the less developed and disadvantaged, so also begin to feel a moment of divine grace, but to achieve these states of grace when necessary due to the slowdown of the mind, made them suffer for a long reincarnations to discover the divine consciousness. But these beings there that was confused provenance or spiritual mind. Such confusions were huge for those who have not had the capacity to discern the real and the illusory. taking some of its potential to discredit the spiritual faculties, become beings of bad nature. Others there were who called themselves as completely enlightened beings, but only through illusion created in the mind. They continued to live or illusory form to deceive or awaken then to the sacred reality, sometimes taking several reincarnations to reach that supreme state of self-realization. Real enlightened masters were those who made distinctions between what was real and illusory. These were examples certain mental states that the mind created the image of the spirit, leading beings to believe it as if it were real. As was the case of dreams and accreditation on them, or feel great happiness followed by great dissatisfaction later. 56. When was in meditative states had feelings descriptive here bells, chains running water cascade, other beings without them there to talk, mental imagery, which they identified as figures of gods. Like that kind of travel during which sidereal thought, who had returned to previous reincarnations, that the mind offered the good pleasure of those who asked him how past experiences. This same mind deceptively presented those facts from the rational system, which had nothing to do with the reality of God. Because the true facts were only fully felt and viewed through the third vision differently. The approaches that were made via the spirit were felt only in the spirit of these beings in times that were completely unaware of what the mind produced and retained. Then giving way through the energy center angel could be received through that channel all messages, whether of nature or simply viewed in a psychic, and never through, because these were already vested in the reasoning. The actual displays were those who through the power of the energy center front, presented in striking shapes and colors without being and for long periods of time. As they were developing the practice of spiritual view of the four bodies, so they could show their own separate physical bodies, as well as health problems they had in organs and limbs. Just by staying in a meditative state to tailor more, and thus leaving completely loose bodies, allowing them to penetrate the divine light through their spirits. What then penetrated the physical bodies in suffering, stay on the complete mastery of energy transmuting, both vibration energy taking the physical body itself to adjust the therapeutic exercises need to. Complete work on the site of pain without any pain for patients. Curators of souls. These which in these times when more complicated cases these bodies were levitated by the same energy, which in interaction with the very being of the restored and healed completely. That's what the members concerned. With their bodies were only recoveries made by the divine light. Both could be committed by the other self as outside it. We only need to enter a meditative state after viewing the diseased organ, through the third vision, that the divine light fell on it causing him to fully recover. Enough only for therapies or cures both observe and nothing more, leaving only take the sensations felt, being just in tune with his spirit and the light that flows from it. 58. Curators of Souls. Chapter 17 Living in the Sacred. From the moment triumph breathing their conscience changes, leaving that way of living through thoughts. This was the first sign of the holy manifest before them, was the beginning of the awakening human conscience. These sons of light live in communion with the sacred in everyday life of these beings in times of illumination. It was quite easy. Because they had already abandoned all moral concepts, addictions, pride, egos, passions, social status, material and emotional detachments, among others that caused them to keep in depressive states in relation to themselves. From all these chains that held them prisoner in the great wheel of reincarnation met then, that in addition to that there was something that abdicated felt and identified as the sacred. That in order to live in constant harmony with the sacred had nothing to do. Just simply sit back and let yourself be a part of the whole. Their ways of life just went to the basics to keep their physical bodies with regard to their maintenance. 60. The physical postures were calm and serene, and just responded without question, were of few words but great deeds, because all knowledge universal was deposited in their souls. The transparency of humility that these beings of light contained was huge, over which they had greater ability to adapt to new situations, changes to the welfare of others, regardless of what was existential for themselves, serving in this way the concept of the union and mutual help. In environments that surrounded them, or their past presence in everything became calm and peaceful, because of the white light of peace emanating from their hundreds crown energy located in the area. The little people still identified sons of light, and we interacted with them, due to the proximity energy which was attracted by the magnetic fields, because their small bodies were still full of pure energy, causing them to feel as if they still remain quite as light beings just before their births. Similarly, the animals and insects were also drawn, because the animals do not feel the smell of negativity on the part of these studies. The insects were attracted by the light that shone through the energy centers. Fluently interact with nature, respecting the entire flora, remained indefinitely in these spaces, feeling and enjoying all that it was granted to them naturally, resembling through the same symptoms and setbacks to their previous experiences and future. Because from the moment it is self-luminous, no longer need to continue the meditation practices that we took was to these achievements. Because they have exceeded and surpassed all that existed in contradiction with those spiritual ascents, they had reason to be. Because from that moment sacred, these enlightened ones went on to be permanently in the state of grace. Curators of souls. It was also by nature, and that it came as wind, sun, rain and other weather elements, that they manifested their power's energy. Now in order to admit these energies in their beings when they were beneficial, or avoiding them and changing their courses through the cosmic energy that kept them in their physical bodies. The connection they had with the Aster King was notorious because of the large percentage of their physical bodies are composed of water. Need to interact much with that of their experiences in order to keep Aster balanced in terms of energy. Because as its sidereal their bodies were also made of light, but due to long periods of meditation prior to their rises for such practices began to feel their voices altered, because over the processes that were watching the breath, this was changing due to a reduced oxygen supply, and a great inspiration for prana, provided the changes, that after the achievements were lower and smoother, changing the phonetic sounds in order to become pure in vibration, the same as from the spheres of the worlds. Thus gained great power vibrating, giving birth in charismatic new forms of private communication or large crowds that when they hear these sounds fondest vibrated so much the physical as in the spirit, leading them to new awakening consciousness. 62. Curators of Souls. Chapter 18 Pre-Achievement. There were three models of beings that were in the completion of the search for spiritual fulfillment. Arising they walked in a particular and individual, viewing only your being, do not bother with the others. They lived as hermits away from companies and people, not open to the outside world, unless they were sought to give advice of their spiritual knowledge. As a rule lived in solitary, or just having some disciple, which was rare, for only the daily maintenance when they reached ages of honor. These hermits experienced sensations, meditative practices in complete isolation, for many decades, increasingly bringing their knowledge, and only by the light company and solitude. What gave them the power to move in all dimensional planes? Usually after their physical death, to leaving the ground plane, and left little or no testimony of their experiences that had led to this spiritual realization. 64. Another way to pre-enlightenment consisted in each of those beings who were at an early age they started teaching sacred, if their spirits were already into the path of a previous reincarnation. That could not ascend this experience completely, that after initiation follow these precepts when they met more adult ages, preferred to abstain completely from links with other masters and beings. Looking only for themselves also in solitary, the teachings that came from the sacred, abandoned population means that even before they had remained so reserved, being accompanied only necessary for their maintenance of the physical. Sought like previous remote places where peace and silence persisted, which made them feel at one with the universe. These beings, even though they had the same ways to search the sacred, as described earlier, they had a different apparent, opened the unveiling of the sacred mysteries to the outside through a disciple who lived with him but separately, which only dealt with the care necessary to maintain the life of both. This student remained with him until physical death, just witnessing what the master's comments about the facts that would unravel spiritual, in order that after his physical death that disciple came to spread all narrative statements as well as others that his master had passed during its existence ground. To our people and other ascended masters of light least, they felt that these students, because they have also dealt closely and contemplated, with your late master. Some of them also had become ascended masters. Because these students were chosen by their masters, who made the reading of the aura before admitting them to feel if they had spiritual opening, later to house sacred knowledge, and so keeping them in complete secrecy until the death of the master. And only after the master's departure, is that the student would have the freedom to manifest such testimony. But only those who have their master still life had broken down to utter such knowledge. Curators of souls. They found a third way to self-actualization, was also in the social environment where they lived, although they also need to be in solitude, to connect with the sacred at some times, which were called spiritual retreats but only for so time. They also had many disciples who ran teachings and testimonies. These masters lived in a more liberal and unlike earlier. The latter sought precisely the relationship with the companies and people that made up to help them gain a new global consciousness. It was that kind of contact they had with their peers less evolved. Because of providing the light that remained in their souls, to distribute to the others this same light, they returned the same under a larger range. That way its more enlightened spirits along the reincarnations would be transformed into full enlightenment. 66. Curators of Souls. Chapter 19 Signs of Enlightenment. Some symptoms that led to enlightenment were very diverse. Through all of these multiple births physical beings of light would admit more light in their souls than in the last reincarnation. They got all the attention that would lead them to feel as part of the cosmic light. These testimonies are always present at times when human minds softened, passages leading to the divine light which in turn fully lit all the inner being, that could close their eyes to go through the third to the astral plane vision, becoming aware of what they were allowed to preview. These capabilities view depended very much to be. The more trusted your spirits, relax and have abandoned this divine light spiritual in jurisdiction, could include more through the eyes of spirit itself. In more advanced beings could even view themselves as if they stayed in front of a mirror illuminated in part their physical figures. This was one of the great frontiers to be reached. Why being spiritual in reaching this level was well incorporated with the heavenly light. Another aspect was to visualize their own auric colors, just closing your physical eyes giving way to located at the third spiritual vision. The time factor for them was without beginning to feel important because the eternal. 68. Earlier views were just a small point of light when sporadically closed their eyes. With patience and practice applied, they began to identify more points of light in the beginning, only darker color over time but tended to clarify, to the extent that thoughts ceased to exist. Later these points of light passing increasingly become bright, until at some point in the result of this evolutionary process, ceased to exist altogether giving rise to the full color of auras. When the opening was great spiritual could include all the colors in the universe, always through the third vision, witnessing a complete open skies endowed with all these colors, in ways small and large luminous particles from the entire cosmos. Featuring vast luminosities were not visible to the physical eyes if you could see them. Because all the colors from the cosmos have brightness enhanced and sensitive than the other reflections of this same light that could be seen through the eyes of physicists. Therefore as by the divine light that filled them, began to notice that from time to time their bodies externalized this same light, through the energy centers. Doing it this way denotes small reflection of that light, in small matters remained at the top of the crust, especially in the most crystal clear. Other identifications as sacred, was the appearance of the spiritual Sunday. Almost like the Sunday. Only your center stand was pure white rays their yellows. illuminating, becovering the whole spirit and soul, reaching this testimony as well as seeing the physical body itself in sidereal plan. It was the culmination of secular demands made by these beings over all previous reincarnations. Cosmos was the sign of admitting a new fully enlightened being that allowed joining the existing heavenly light. Curators of Souls. Chapter 20 Enlightened. The nature of light is coming from a positive pole in the universe, but needs assistance in some of the negative pole existing planets to circulate the denser energy. On this basis, the energy that governs the entire cosmos is positive. The positive energy was related to the human male. And only these beings of light that is lighting could rise to complete, with few exceptions. As occasionally happened that a female human being, who was a channel through which passed the energy of the negative, could the metamorphosis of his spirit leaving his physical body completely, going by his spirit then another physical body occupying a male in a moribund condition just before the physical death. Only after his spirit to be implemented in this new body is that men could then ascend to the purpose of realization as being full of light, because the wheel of reincarnation reincarnate once as being positive and naked, next to be negative with few exceptions. These two poles energy when joined together in a spiritual way awaken the energies needed to contain the physical bodies. 70. The negative energy when tuned to the positive, both physical bodies turned into one body energy. Thus the energy of the negative was to trigger the positive pole, which was less evolved beings stagnant. When the same uncongested climbed over the physical body to the crown energy center, which in turn was expanded to the universe. Some beings have felt the positive energy through these unions to full realization. With regard to their negative energy pole pairs, but never could only realize that view ascension. Although it was much evolved beings of light, would have to prepare for your next life in reincarnation, and then wait for physical death. To then have a physical rebirth as beings pole positions? And only after that were able to ascend to higher levels of consciousness and spirituality, becoming human beings full of light. There were three forms of lighting. One can be described in more quickly. The universe. Curators of Souls. Jos Cruz.